So today we have the visit of Professor Gijsbert Hoogendoorn. Is a full professor of students geography at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. He earned his PhD in geography from the University of the Free State in 2011. With over 100 published journal articles, his research covers diverse topics, including second homes tourism, climate change and tourism, urban tourism, cultural and creative tourism. In 2022, he co-authored a monograph, Climate Change and Tourism in Southern Africa, for Routledge. So welcome, Gijsbert. You can start when you want.
All right. Thank you very much, Maria. I appreciate it. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks, everybody. I was really glad to hear from Maria that second home tourism research is starting to gain some traction in Uruguay, and I hope the all of Latin America. It would be really fantastic if we can broaden the scope of this type of research. Yeah, so I just want to check, can everybody hear me clearly? Okay, yes. Great. So yes. So thanks. This paper is a review paper that I did with a PhD student of mine, Samira Ismail. She's on the call here. Myself and Dieter Müller from Umeå University in Sweden, and then Samira and I are from the University of Johannesburg. This is part of Samira's PhD studies. After this, we hope that some information around empirical issues of environmental impacts of second homes in South Africa will come out and be published eventually. So, but I think as part of the process of doing a PhD, we thought that doing a literature review on the contours of the debate around second homes, it would be good to start off with a review paper. So yeah, let's get into it. So I, like I said earlier to some of you, I've now officially this year, it's been 20 years for me doing research on second home tourism. And for the most part, it remains still very focused on social issues, economic issues, the mobilities around second home tourism. There's some research on housing and planning around second home tourism. But the environment, despite the context we face ourselves in the 21st century, the environment remains fairly understudied relatively in comparison to the other themes. But as Dieter said earlier this year, that there is a growing interest now that can be detected, and hopefully more papers like this and more research across the globe, we can really get a critical mass going around this topic. So it is quite straightforward that any form of yeah.
Sorry, Gijsbert, we are seeing your screen, but not the full presentation. I don't know. Sorry that I didn't say it before.
Okay, let's try. Do you see it now?
No. Hi, good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening to everyone. This happens sometimes in Zoom because probably you are using two screens, right?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, then you have to make something in the configuration to split the screens, but don't ask me what you need to do, because that happened to me. That happened to me in one previous video conference. It was absolutely a mess, and I couldn't do it. Just if you want to be sure, the best thing you can do is just don't use the two screens. First, try to amend it, right? But if this, yeah, it's something you have to do somewhere.
Let me see.
But I couldn't do it, so I finally decided just to use one screen only.
How about now?
No, it's the same.
I've now switched off my one screen completely. Let me reshare it.
Then maybe we can see, you know, that in the top of the screen, you have some display settings. Maybe you are almost there. Now you can do it. Yeah, just in the bottom part. Exactly. You are there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yay. Okay.
Do it.
Well, can you see so you can see my presentation now?
Not perfectly well. Try to press in the screen again. But if not, I think yeah, we can follow you. It's not a big deal.
Okay, you can see now.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, well,
go on.
All right, you didn't miss much. That this was my my initial picture with my colleagues, and there I was just mentioning about the different types of research that's been taking place, social economic mobilities, limited research, but there's a growing interest. So that's the only two slides we missed, but here we are. It goes without saying that any form of usage of a property, but it does have an impact on the environment, and it has been it's been found in research that second homes pressure the environment through a variety of means or ways. One is through construction, the operation and the maintenance of uses home, but also the issue of global environmental change. That's something that we need to consider in terms of second homes. And I think one of the things that we found in this research, because of the desire to do something about climate change, to do something about the consequences of global environmental change, there's a shift toward the inclusion of environmental impacts in research. So what we did in this paper is we looked in the time period from 2012 to 2022. We looked at about 275 second home studies, and then we narrowed it down to 125 for the 10-year period. And then out of that, about 40 of them were on the environmental aspects of second homes. But I mean, second home research has been around for close on 100 years, if not 100 years already, especially since the 1970s. It's been quite prominent, especially the late 1990s saw a new emergence. And then when Dieter and Michael Hall did their book in 2004, that also gained some traction on this topic. But it's only really the last couple of years that the environmental impacts have become prominent with these 40 papers we will be discussing in this presentation. So this presentation aims to provide a base for future studies on second home tourism and the environment nexus by reviewing the environmental impacts. So methodologically, we considered different steps. We looked at different databases, removing duplicates, looking at screening and including certain ones or not, which ones looked at the time period we're looking at, which was on environmental impacts, obviously all in English. Unfortunately, although we speak many languages in South Africa, 11 of them, there's only really one language in which we publish on this topic, and that's in English. So that's all English. Unfortunately, no hablo español. If I could perhaps speak Spanish, maybe I could find some research on this topic. So we looked at different criteria, titles, keywords, and different types of formats. But the first thing we did is we considered the major global environmental policies, and one of the major global environmental policies is obviously the Sustainable Development Goals. And as a first exercise in this research, we tried to connect second homes to the Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the things we did is we looked at second homes in education, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, industry and innovation, infrastructure, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land. So we did, as an exercise in this topic, we tried to connect it to some of the Sustainable Development Goals, although we are rather critical about this issue. But we'll come to that later in the presentation. But initially, we try to see how it would connect. Okay. But as I said, the relationship between the Sustainable Development Goals and second homes is not unidimensional, and second homes is a consumptive practice that impacts the environment, and we are sort of arguing that there needs to be very much a place-based context to understanding second homes and the environment connected to the Sustainable Development Goals. And that's why we need a much bigger understanding of this topic, but we'll get to some of those aspects later. If we had to look at current state of second homes, given if we remove it away a little bit from the environmental impacts, some of the major issues that have emerged in the last decade or so is economic impacts, looking at transnational property investments. There's a lot of research that focuses on, say, Russians in Finland, Germans in Sweden, the British people in southern France or in Spain. We have also in South Africa, we have many people from the Netherlands and from Germany and the UK that own second homes in our southern coast. So a lot of research has happened around transnational aspects, also planning and issues around retirement, municipal planning, rural development, the invisibility, the seasonality around second homes, but then also a lot of social impacts, sort of the issues around seasonality, but also foreign influence in rural localities, and that has been quite popular. You can see that obviously the social aspects see quite a lot of focus, and the other topics a bit less. Which again just highlights our need to look at the environmental impacts of second homes. So if we then dive deeper into the environmental impacts of second homes is by definition, not always, but in most cases, in attractive areas. We try not to go on holiday in places that are ugly, to put it plainly. We try and go to places that are attractive, and it's often based in desirable natural areas. Lakes are very popular, mountainous areas on the coast, in forests, and so forth. People enjoy having second homes in beautiful areas. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, a second home in an environmental area, in an environmentally desirable area, you can often see the impact more clearly. You can see the environmental impact of a second home much more clearly in a beautiful area, naturally beautiful area, than say in a major city. So it does impact it quite quickly. Okay, so often, and also, yeah, like I said, second homes are in environmentally sensitive areas too, often close to lakes or wetlands, and therefore it requires particular focus. But also, if I had to quote Jarvis et al., a destination's environmental attributes often influence a trip's value, and if that aesthetic value is not met, that will decline the aesthetic appeal of a destination, and therefore not only is it environmentally bad, but you're also not making, say, financial gains from second home ownership. And then also there's the issues around social impacts. So second homes can, if unmanaged or not managed well, can cause large-scale pollution. There can be water quality deterioration by waste and illegal landfills. It can contribute to solid waste and sewage. And then, of course, the movement to and from second homes contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, depending on how much traveling happens, how frequently one travels, and what kind of vehicle we use. In South Africa, many second home owners travel to their holiday homes or their second homes with big 4x4 pickup trucks. Those are especially bad for the environment. That would be different to certain localities across the world where people can travel, say, by train. Then this is an example of South Africa. This is a second home destination or a town not too far from me, probably about 60 kilometers or so from me, called Hartbeespoort. You can see in some of the locations there's second homes in the background. Now, let me be clear, the second homes aren't the source of that entirely. But this river that feeds this lake comes through Johannesburg, or in between Johannesburg and Pretoria, which is the two major cities. I think the entire urban area now recently is about 16 million people, and a lot of pollution ends up in one of the rivers that feeds this lake. And then the consequence is that you have massive hyacinth blooms. You have a lot of pollution that also takes place in terms of littering. You can see some of the rubbish on top there that comes from the areas around this lake. But then also there's been claims that the second homes also contribute to the pollution. You can see there's also a picture of fish kills that has happened. So the point is there's multiple layers of people contributing to this major decline in the environment. It's not only the second homeowners, but they also have a contribution to make here. And I think that's important to note here, that it's a multi-scalar aspect here that we need to consider when we consider this issue. But also, I mean, I don't think I have to ask this question. People would avoid going to places like this if they can. It's not pleasant. If you go there, there's a certain smell, there's some pollution. It's just not somewhere you want to go in your free time. You would rather go to a place that is aesthetically very appealing. So that is just to give you some context on why we do this research. So second homes can also, especially in terms of development, it can lead to in the papers we looked at, it can lead to deforestation, encroaching onto green spaces, especially onto potentially places that have very unique fauna and flora. There's soil disturbance that can take place. But also second home ownership can reduce accessibility to natural landscapes for the public. Second home ownership, depending where you are in the world, in places like Sweden and Norway and Finland, it's very much a middle-class phenomenon. It's not wealthy people don't necessarily own second homes that much in countries like that. But in South Africa, a certain part of the population are extremely wealthy, and they will buy up certain properties, and this will limit access to certain environments, which can lead, like I said previously, lead to the clearance of natural vegetation, and earth removal works can have an impact on environment. Second homes can also cause traffic congestion and noise pollution, especially during seasonal periods. There are cities in South Africa that are predominantly second homes where it can take you up to an hour and a half to get only into the city itself, where there are mostly second homes, because of the sort of seasonal migration into these towns. And then the reality is that often these are small towns or medium towns, and they're not necessarily built for these numbers of people coming in, and therefore then there's issues around that. All right, I already spoke about the fauna and flora. Then I would say one of the issues, especially coming from 2005, from the work that Nick Gallen did, is that there's often disjuncture or a discussion between a newly built second home or a second home that's converted, a primary home that's converted into second homes. So often in South Africa, what people do is they will go build a second home new along the coast or along a river, which then can have quite severe environmental impacts. Whereas in places like Sweden, these are places that have suffered from depopulation over the years. You have homes that were primary homes that have been converted into second homes. So the environmental impacts aren't necessarily that new, but also the nature of the second homes, it doesn't necessarily have electricity or requires massive infrastructural development. Therefore, the impacts of second homes in Sweden would be desirably or quite a bit less than newly developed massive sort of resort style developments with golf courses that requires a lot of water, or other types of developments along the coast in South Africa, as an example, that really would have a negative impact. But of course, because of the context we live in, there's increasingly eco-friendly measures. People are implementing energy-saving measures, water recycling measures, waste recycling measures to neutralize the impacts of second home ownership. In many cases, second homes are in so-called eco estates, or natural estates or environmental estates, claiming that there is limited or no environmental impacts. But the reality is, if you look a little bit deeper, often there is. It's just in the name. Eco is just the name. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's much ecological protection happening. It just sounds trendy and like a good thing to do. So because of the extremely limited nature of second home research, we don't know that much about local residents' perspectives on the environmental impacts of second homes, and we don't know that much of what second home owners think about their environmental impacts. There is some studies, but it's not an enormous amount. But I think one of the studies that stand out is Kaltenborn from 2008. They refer specifically to saying that the host communities are quite, I think this is in the case of Norway, if I'm not mistaken, they are quite negative towards second homes because of their environmental impact, which indicates a strong environmental awareness amongst the local residents in terms of the environmental impacts. And a lot of them promote sort of environmental protection and conservation as part of their initiatives. But also many second home owners, and depending on the study and the location, are well-educated individuals with means, and they understand what impact their second homes may have, and then environmental protection and conservation measures they implement. I remember from years ago when I did my PhD, there was a local resident that told me that they hate it when the weekends come around, because then the second home owners come in and the sewage system gets blocked, the energy supply starts dripping, and there's often infrastructural sort of dilapidation happening when second home owners are there, and they wish that was not the case. But at the same time, in the South African case, there's lots of financial benefits to second homes, especially in a developing economy. But there's also the argument by Hilton in Finland that host communities often have a better perspective of environmental impacts of second home owners because they are there all the time. You get second home owners who are there once a year for 5 days, and you get people who stay up to 20 days, 30 days, 60 days, maybe in rare cases, half a year. But they are not there. They don't know what's happening, and therefore you need to listen to your local residents, in other words. This is just some perspective on what kind of studies has been conducted on this topic: eco-social impacts, physical impacts, policy and planning and environmental impacts of housing supply, modern versus traditional versus modern second homes, etc. Okay. How are we doing for time? I just want to check if we're still okay.
Yes, perfect.
Okay,
Yes.
thanks. So some discussion points. As I've said, that this topic is quite understudied relative to the other topics in second home research. But I think what's important to say is that second homes and the consumption around second homes should not be seen in isolation. I don't think that it is necessarily useful to point the finger at second homes. Second homes, that's bad. They cause trouble. They should be eliminated. I don't think that's necessarily a useful approach. It has to do with a variety of issues. It has to do with government. It has to do with planning. It has to do with local residents. It has to do with the context, the environment, the physical characteristics, water availability, electricity availability, etc. So there's a need for a much more systematic approach around second home tourism, especially in terms of overall consumption patterns and not single activities. Because as Dieter has mentioned in research he did not that long ago, tourism is in the tourism sector, as in the economic aspects of second homes, is infused, the economics of tourism is infused into society. It's not like we can say it's mining, where you take out a certain amount of gold and then this is the value. You can't determine the value as well or as easily because it's not so discrete. And so tourism is infused into society, and therefore we need to consider all the aspects. And the same applies to this one type of tourism called second home tourism. And one of the arguments we make in this paper is that there is an inherent conflict between identifying the sustainable development goals and applying it to second homes, as it is quite difficult to measure and implement it, but also varies quite significantly in the global south as compared to the global north. So we were of the view that the Sustainable Development Goals provides nice target guidelines for what we can do around the environmental impacts of second homes, but we have to manage the contextual aspects and the what's the word I'm looking for, the contingencies of each locality. In other words, we are all geographers who did this research. In other words, we are emphasizing or foregrounding the geography of each location. So one fits all approach does not apply, as I'm sure we don't know nearly enough about second homes in the South American or Latin American context. So using sort of a top-down approach and say in Uruguay you need to apply it like this would not make a lot of sense, because we don't understand enough about this topic in Uruguay, and the same applies to South Africa. So obviously financial resources differ from one location to another. Resources, awareness is a major issue. Sanitation capacity, quality infrastructure, sustainable cities, how sustainable are these environments, efficient consumption, and the production and climate action. So yeah, sure, in the global north and in very wealthy countries in Europe, for example, they can implement all kinds of environmentally friendly technologies quite easily and affordably, and governments can subsidize residents to second home owners and residents to make use of alternate supply methods of energy and water, and it looks very good, but the reality is often the technologies that are used in these sustainable technologies is often mined in the global south. So especially in South Africa, a lot of minerals are mined in South Africa and then sent to the global north to develop the technologies that is more sustainable. So while it looks sustainable, if you actually follow the money or you follow the chain, it's not that environmentally friendly. So we need to look at sort of the greenwashing aspects versus the reality. And that's often the case that we need to consider. I can't speak much for Latin America, but in the global South, especially in Africa, people are focusing on alleviating poverty. They're focusing on economic development. They're focusing on basic service provision, in other words, electricity, water, sanitation, rather than focusing on environmental awareness and sustainable development in terms of climate change. Because the day-to-day realities is about food provision. It is about water. It's about addressing inequalities. And when people are preoccupied in these sort of desires or needs, it's quite hard to focus on something that seems rather inessential, like holiday homes of the wealthy on the coast. I mean, who cares? But that needs to be addressed. I don't think that we have the time necessarily left to sort of just focus on areas. We need sort of like I said previously, a systematic approach that considers all of these issues rather than one issue. There's also the low adaptive capacity in the global South, and that's about meeting short-term goals. Climate change is on the one hand being exacerbated by second home ownership, but at the same time, things like sea level rise or storm surges or tropical cyclones in our case will impact a lot of these environments quite severely, and then that influences the economic aspect. So we do need a more holistic approach. But like I said, we need to foreground the location-based aspects and also consider people's perceptions, second home owner perceptions, local residents' perceptions, government perceptions. So like I said, we need to look at the national, regional, and local government issues. Okay, to conclude, Frost in 2004 mentioned that second home ownership is a hidden giant, and it truly is a hidden giant. There are entire coastlines across the world that are completely covered by second homes, and the economies and the social impacts and environmental impacts around it, but it's hidden. We don't know enough, and I've said to Maria earlier, I'm very happy that it seems that more research is going to be done around second homes in Uruguay. I think that's fantastic, and I think we need more of that, and we need more of that urgently, so that we can fill the gap, but also understand more holistically what's going on. And the global and local patterns obviously vary. But also more research would hopefully increase awareness, emphasizing the need for dissemination of research so that more people are aware. Now, the lack of quality data is also quite important. My colleagues in Sweden, Dieter and them are quite, I call them lucky, but at the same time, they've got an incredible database called Astrid in Sweden, where they have essentially second home censuses that takes place on every couple of years, where they really have an excellent understanding of the amount of second homes they have, who owns them, what are the economic aspects, what are their social impacts, environmental, is there displacement that takes place because of second homes. They have this incredible database that you can really go into fine-grained analysis of the impacts of second homes, and therefore you can manage it incredibly well. Now, then we go to the other side of the globe, we go to South Africa. We have no idea how many second homes we have, not even a clue. It could be 100,000, it could be 500,000, it could be 5 million. We don't know. It's very hard to determine, but I think if you can develop quality databases across the globe, that would help a lot in terms of understanding this phenomenon. But there's also a distinct lack of policy and implementation. to have a good policy doesn't mean it's implemented, obviously, but you can look at many policy documents in South Africa, and a lot of places that are very focused around second home tourism, but they won't mention holiday home or second home once. So you need to have policies across the globe that consider second home ownership more concretely and more holistically to benefit the environment. So I'm not sure how we're doing for time, but that's my story. I hope we can have a few questions and discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Gijsbert, for your presentation. Very interesting. Yes, we agree with you. No, here in Uruguay, in South America, it's the same. We have no idea that how many second homes we have, and so we have to continue studying this topic too. But we prepare with Valeria some comments for you. But first, I would like to ask you about the city that you show on the photos. How do you know how they manage this situation?
How
it was something specifically always happened this.
So this is an historical process that's been happening over a very long period of time. As Johannesburg and Pretoria, what's called the Gauteng province, as it's grown more and more, and like I said, it's 16 million people now. Say maybe 20, 30 years ago, it was more in the region of 7 million people. So it's grown enormously, the cities, and enormously quickly, but also a lot of in-migration, and also the consequences, a lot of informal settlements. And because of informal settlements, there's often not, there's no sanitation, a proper sanitation, there's no services. So a lot of pollution ends up in the rivers, and then it flows constantly into this area, and then eventually into this lake. So the municipality can't do anything here. They can't do much to stop this issue. They can try and clear things. They can try and stop they can stop any form of sewage or pollution from their side. But this is also in a different province in the country where these second homes are, but then the pollution comes from another province. So they aren't able to do much to stop this issue. It requires provincial governments to communicate with each other. It requires the different municipalities to communicate with each other in terms of sewage clearance, sewage protection, sewage treatment. But also it looks to a much larger scale of governance issues, providing people with proper housing, proper sanitation, job security, employment. And only then can you really address this issue. So second homes is but one part of a major or large scale issue here.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We have similar problem, not at this scale, no, so big, but similar problem here in Punta del Este with second homes in a lake here. But well, okay. Valeria have some comments for you that is going to share.
Yes.
Can you stop your share now?
It's
Oh, you
I
can.
think when I share, stop.
Great.
Well, you can see. Okay.
Yeah, I can. Thank you.
So maybe some questions are already answered with the presentation. Sorry, because when I read the paper, some questions came up, but I think you explain better here in the presentation, and I understand well. So this is a fragment of the paper. Relative few studies have been undertaken on the environmental aspects, as second home often do not present new environmental impacts in the case of converted second homes. The questions are, do you recall any paper that has data on the number of converted second homes, those second homes that were original permanent dwellings?
I think the best option there is that my colleagues in Sweden can look at that kind of stuff quite easily. They have data on how many first homes were converted into second homes, but then also which second homes became first homes again. They have that fine-grained data. So I think if you look at the work of Dieter Müller, I think if you look at Roger Mariovara, Andreas Bach, their work is quite focused on that level of data. So I'm sure if you look at there, but then also the stuff from Norway, Kjell Overvåg, his work may be of use, but then also my colleagues in Finland, Kati Pikkanen, Olga Hannunen, I think those are the places with the best data for this type of topic. But then there's also some paper, there's a paper from Davina Chaplin, I think. This is a long time ago, from the 90s, looking at sort of the DIY projects that Brits would take on in southern France in terms of how they convert first homes into second homes themselves and how they engage in doing that themselves. It also depends on the free labor or the freely available labor you have in countries and the expense of labor. In South Africa, labor is rather cheap, which obviously can lead to exploitation or has led to exploitation, but labor is rather cheap in South Africa, so people often, it's not that difficult to convert the first home into a second home, but often it's newly built, whereas in countries where labor is expensive, people will probably do it more themselves.
Okay, thank you. And the other question is, have you found any papers that have worked on the reverse phenomenon, second home that have been converted into permanent housing, especially as a result of the COVID-19?
Yeah, so that's a relatively new topic. I know Dieter did a special session at the Nordic Geographers Conference called Second Homes as Zoom Towns. Zoom towns is an American idea or terminology, and that's often where people, in some cases, escaped cities to go to second homes to avoid corona or avoid COVID-19, because obviously population densities are less, and therefore the chances of contracting corona was less. So a lot of people did try and move out to rural areas as a result. There's some papers now slowly emerging from that. I know a whole cluster of colleagues did a paper recently on second homes and COVID-19. I think it came from the Nordic Geographers Conference. I'm not entirely sure. That's also happened in South Africa, where people have moved to rural areas or to small towns rather. And then as the pandemic progressed, people realized that they don't have to go into work. They can do most of their work remotely. And while we may have had some kind of perspective or an idea that we have to be at an office to do our work, that has been challenged, and therefore people decided to move to rural areas. So that is emerging. There are some papers around that, but that's not a new topic in second home research at all. In the early 1970s, there were research that spoke then about telemobility, because obviously then they thought about telephones, not about Zoom or Teams or Skype. But they predicted that telemobility would lead to the conversion from second homes into first homes. Yeah, so that's certainly emerging at the moment.
Thank you. Well, about the invisibility of second homes in statistics that you mentioned, what do you think is the best way to obtain better statistics on second home and make them comparable between countries?
Yeah, so that's quite tricky because people need to be able to know what a second home is, and they need to be able to identify it, because there's obviously a difference between a second home, because the word home comes here, not your second house. So it's to do with second homes, second properties. And also then the problem is you can say, yeah, but I have many second homes. Well, is it second home or first home, second home, third home, fourth home? So there is a bit of a definitional aspect that requires, but it also requires people to display or acknowledge their multiple property ownership. So in other words, what's happening here is you're digging into wealth. In some places in Europe, you may pay tax at your first home, but you may not necessarily pay tax at your second home. And that brings in all kinds of issues with what people want to declare and what they don't want to declare. But I think what needs to happen is that there needs to be some level of education, but then that there's also a declaration that probably needs to happen on a national level in different countries to really be able to identify the number of second homes. And then there can be follow-up studies, like almost census-style studies on second homes, so that we can start comparing. Because you can compare maybe Sweden and Finland to each other, but you cannot compare South Africa and Uruguay to each other. We don't have the data. So that certainly is a necessity, yeah.
Okay. A few studies, this is also a fragment of the paper. A few studies have looked at second homes in a more holistic view by considering the social, economic, and environmental impacts in an integrated way. I'm curious about the methodologies where they used to do this holistic approach. Do you recall some methodology?
Yeah, so Maria, this is the paper I was referring to, Mateucci. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly at all.
Great.
That's an example from Latin America, research on second homes. That's from Latin America. I don't recall the methodology in this study specifically. But the point is, I think what's important is that a lot of databases, especially in the studies we've done in South Africa, is researcher developed databases. We went and we asked people and we developed databases around it. And then we have specifically asked them about the social impacts and their experiences. And we specifically asked them about the economic aspects and environmental aspects. So that was one way in which it was done. A fellow student from years ago, now probably like 15 plus years ago, he did a study where he tracked water consumption. And then he could look at water consumption over a year and when the water consumption would spike when second home owners would come in. And that was also one way in which they identified second homes. So often over weekends it would spike. But obviously people are more at home over weekends, so the water usage would spike more. But then they realized that the amount of people were there and then the spike is not the same. So they obviously connected it to second home owners. The same, looking at municipal level data in terms of electricity usage and how that changes. So you can also look at that level of data. But I also feel that in the age of social media, we can potentially look at ethnographic sources to consider the environmental impacts of second homes, or a collective or a more holistic approach to understanding second homes. I'm sure that if you go look on different social media platforms at How to Be a Spoor, the place that I mentioned in terms of the pictures, I'm sure if you go look at the different Facebook groups or Instagram posts on that, you can also do quite a good analysis of what the broader public thinks about environmental decline. So yeah, I can't say exactly when it comes to Mateucci, but those are some examples that I can think of now as sort of multi-methodology or mixed methodology approaches.
Okay, so a combination with qualitative and quantitative. Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you. And the last one, even though this review has identified environmental research themes, the findings suggest that the research has been on a tiny scale. Most of the themes each have only one case study undertaken. I think you mentioned this, but maybe you can talk about a bit more. Are you thinking of conducting an empirical study that relates second homes to sustainable development or environmental pollution, and what methodology will you use?
So Samira, who's a co-author on the paper here, we specifically are looking right now at the northern coast of Durban. Durban is one of the 3 major cities in South Africa, and the north coast of Durban is one of the famous second home destinations of the country. That's historically been a place that it's had many second homes for probably more than 120 years, but especially since the 1970s, and then more so over the last, say, 20 years, it's developed quite a lot. There's some places that were initially second home locations that became permanent residence areas, more suburbs closer to the city. But then this is a major study that's been undertaken. I think I've actually have it written on behind me. We've done about 285 questionnaires completed from second home owners from that area. There was we identified roughly about 2,500 second homes, if I'm not mistaken. Getting them to respond was not easy. Over very many months, Samira did field work where she finally got about 285 responses from second home owners. We also spoke to councillors, managers, governmental representatives in terms of what they found and what are their concerns and what kind of management plans they've put in place or not put in place. Again, it's been difficult to get hold of some people. Some people are quite willing to talk. Others are not that keen, because the reality is you may be pointing a finger at mismanagement as an example. I'm not saying that's the case, but I'm saying, you know, if you say to someone, okay, well, we have so many second homes, this is the environmental impacts, this is what's happening, it may be quite a sensitive topic in certain cases. So yeah, that's a mixed methodology between getting in, hopefully, close to, I think it's representative in the sense that we did reach saturation at around about 285. We hope to get about 325 in or something like that, to have at least certain levels of confidence rates, etc. But 285 was the saturation rate, and then obviously open-ended interviews that was based around discussion. So that's the methodology we used. It's not been written up as yet, but that's now in Samira's hands to do for her PhD submission. No pressure.
Okay. Thank you very much. I really liked the review. I really liked the approach of the review, and it was very, for us that work in a second home, was very, very interesting and very useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Is there any question? Juan Carlos, I have a question.
Yeah, I would like to ask Gijsbert. Well, apparently you have made a review on this issue, but this is going to be also useful for Valeria, for the kind of questions she was mentioning. because we have published a paper of second homes in Vilcabamba, Ecuador. And there we had a problem with the relationship with tourism, because you know that for being a tourist, you need to be less than 1 year. If not, you become a permanent resident. This is quite linked to one of the questions made by Valeria. In our paper and in the data set, we realized that some Europeans and some people from Canada and from the United States, they were cheating on us. They were saying that they were tourists because at the same time they want to be resident at the respective countries for the health insurance, for health issues. I'm not sure if this is happening in South Africa, in all these places you have mentioned, like Durban, and I'm not sure if this is going to happen even in Punta del Este, that some people are there almost permanently, but at the same time they are going to say, no, but we are residents in our countries, because if they say they are not permanent residents in the countries, and sometimes they have to pay for some health issue. Yeah. So do you have a similar problem in the data sets you have used in the past?
So I mean, we wouldn't have focused on that level, but I can tell you that it really does depend on the nature of the place that you go to. So South Africa is a very new liberal country in terms of its economic policies. A large part of healthcare, for example, is privatized and quite expensive. I imagine in the US it would be similar. So people do not want to lose out on the benefits they can get from their home countries, because their home countries may have a much better, well, retirement plans or healthcare plans or life insurance plans. Therefore, you know, they won't necessarily become permanent residents or citizens of the places they're staying, because they don't want to lose out on those benefits. But also, the South African currency, for example, is a lot weaker than the pound or the euro. So if you get your retirement fund from a European agency or from Europe, it's a lot more beneficial, because you'll be a lot more wealthy than having a lump sum that then decreases if you have the South African currency or wherever. So that level of data, no, I've not looked at, but I can well imagine that people will, what's a nice way of putting it, smudge the details so that they're not found out. So yeah, I would not be surprised. But there's also, the reality is that in some parts of Cape Town, large parts are owned by foreign individuals that are significantly wealthier than South Africans, even wealthy South Africans. And the reality is that they've outpriced the property for South Africans, so they can't necessarily buy there. But then there's other benefits in terms of gaining tax revenue. But there's lots of research on, especially in the UK, around sort of the new colonialism that can be caused by second home owners. So, for example, English second home owners in Wales or in Scotland, and then the fact that it is seen as more consumptive and it doesn't necessarily bring any benefits to the local environments.
Well, here in Canary Islands, Gijsbert, we have also, you know, a lot of different people, British, Germans, and Nordics. We have many second home owners that eventually they come to be retired here. So
yeah.
So well, and my final question will be also, you know, this can open a new area just to make a new research, because in Vilcabamba, at least, we didn't do that in the past. But in Vilcabamba, this is a destination for second home owners. There were a lot of people from abroad. It was quite amazing that We have people from the United States, Canada, Europeans, even people from Poland. It was like a crazy, you know, this idea. This is like a valley, apparently a valley, that you can get an extra, a bonus of an extra 10 years of longevity. This is the crazy idea about that. But I think, you know, mixing this with the environmental cost, it will be quite attractive just to compare destinations and to see what are the CO2 emissions in terms of the trips. Because I'm pretty sure, you know, that for some destinations, which are mainly the second home houses, I'm pretty sure, you know, that some destinations are really, really, there are owners from all over the world. For some of the destinations, maybe the environmental costs are not so high. So, well, the young scholars have an interesting venue to explore. So I know Gabriel is here, so like, I would like to say hello. Well, thanks again for such inspiring moments.
Thank you. I think I'll just make a quick comment on CO2 emissions. So when my colleagues live in northern Sweden, they have their first home in town, and then 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers away, they'll have their second home, and that second home is a converted first home. So their environmental impact in terms of CO2s is quite minimal because it's driving 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers once a week. Other people drive long. In South Africa, I would say many second homes are 300 kilometers up to 1,200, 1,400 kilometers away. So it depends on the regularity of the visitation, flights, long-haul flights, regional flights, what kind of vehicle you used. So yeah, I think a very sort of rigorous methodology would help a lot to that type of study.
Great. Thank you. Natalia has a question now.
Thank you, Maria Jose. Thank you for your presentation. I only have a comment. Sure. Imagine that you tell us your paper without second homes, without the second homes. So I was wondering, which is the differential of the second home's impact on the environment? Because all the things or all the arguments apply to tourism. Yeah. So I think that your paper would be more powerful if you could distinguish the effects of tourism, second homes, a boom of construction of hotels, for example, because in that way, second homes is tourism, not second homes, the environmental effects. I don't know if you said that, you told us about this issue, but I think something is missing in the paper, or I missed that, I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, it's you can make the argument that if you just look at tourism as a whole, but the point is you need layers of understanding to really be able to determine the overall impact. And one way of understanding that level of detail is by identifying second home ownership, so that you can connect second home ownership into the broader global scale of environmental impacts. But the problem is that this is the hidden giant aspect that I was referring to, is that we don't understand that fine-grained analysis or that level of impact because we don't know enough about second home ownership. So yes, you're right, but I'm arguing for more detail, for more understanding.
Okay. Thank you, Gijsbert. Is there any question? No? All right. So, well, thank you very much, Gijsbert, for your presentation. It's a very interesting topic, second homes, and I have a lot of research to do, a long way to walk. Yes.
Thank you very much.
So,
yeah, I really appreciate it. And yeah, if anybody's got any questions or further questions, please feel free to email me and I can respond, and I can put you into contact with colleagues elsewhere in the world that may be able to assist also.